Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening or joining us in a recording of this if you're watching it after the event. My name's Jackie O'Hanlon. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the RSC in my day job, but I'm also delighted to be an Evidence Associate with the Cultural Learning Alliance. And this is the first in a series of webinars that the Cultural Learning Alliance is programming. Sally and Derry, the co-chairs of the CLA, want to create a series of opportunities to share great speakers and great debates and great research with the broadest possible base of CLA membership. So we're really delighted to welcome you all to this first one of those. I'm in a moment now, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to come in and they're going to introduce themselves to you. Then Professor Pat Thompson is going to take you through the key findings of this major study that is the focus of this first webinar, a report called Research for Arts in Primary Schools. So Pat's going to take us through the key findings of that report. As she does that, you're very welcome to post questions in the chat function. We ask that you, if you'd be happy to, make sure that your name and if you represent an organisation, do put those clearly alongside the question. And then we're going to collect all of the questions and come back to them once we've gone through the presentation. But first of all, let's introduce everybody that is going to be speaking with us and sharing research and experiences with us today. So Pat, could you come in first and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking from Australia, and it's 5:30 a.m. and I'm Pat Thompson from the University of Nottingham.
Thank you, Pat. And Christine, could you come in and introduce yourself?
Well, good evening from me. I'm Chris Hall. I'm co-director of the project with Pat on research into arts-rich primary schools, and I'm speaking from Nottingham.
Thank you, Christine, for joining us. And Liam, could you come in and say hello to everybody, please?
Hello and good evening. I was the research fellow on the project, and I visited all of those 41 schools, some of them twice, and I interviewed all of those 854 children, 150 staff, and worked very closely with the data.
Wow. Thanks so much, Liam. So as well as Chris and Pat and Liam, who are the research team, we also have with us two senior leaders who were participating, their schools were participating in the study. So Kerry, could you come and introduce yourself, please? Would you come off mute, Kerry?
Can you believe it? There's always one. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Sellens, Assistant Head at Lansbury Lawrence Primary School, which is in East London. And we are very, very proud to be part of this project. And Liam came to our school. Hello, Liam.
Lovely. So it's a reunion. And Jo Clifton, could you come on screen and introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Joanne Clifton. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Development at the Elliott Foundation Academies Trust. It's a large primary trust, and we're really proud that two of our schools, Billsley Primary School in Birmingham and Greenside Academy in London, were part of this programme.
Great. So we'll hear from Jo and Kerry in a little bit, but we're going to start by Pat Thompson, Professor Pat Thompson, giving us an overview of the study itself and its key findings. So Pat, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to the Cultural Learning Alliance for helping us to launch this report, which was funded by the Freelands Foundation and which finished at the end of 2024. It was a 3-year project, At the end of this fairly brief presentation, there will be a web address where you can download the report, and you can find full details of the schools and the data that Liam referred to, the kind of technical details about what we did, you can find in the report. What I'm going to do tonight is just talk through what we think are really the key findings and the things that I guess we think we've found that perhaps other projects haven't pointed to, and particularly in the same kind of detail. And I do want to say, as far as we're aware, this is the largest study of its kind, certainly in the UK. And so it does, just because of its size, it's probably you know, important enough for us to think that the findings have some take beyond the particular schools. So I just wanted to start by talking about this term arts rich, and it's a term which was really coined by the late James Catterall, and he did a number of studies, and the one which we think is the most important, and it's not the one which is quoted most, was where he looked at what had happened to 12,000 students over 12 years, and he followed them through high school into college or beyond high school, and he looked at what arts richness was in secondary schools, because what he'd found was that what he called low-income students who'd been to arts-rich schools were 14% more likely to be in further or higher education and 50% more likely to be studying for an arts degree than low-income students in what he called arts-poor schools. So he argues that this is actually, if you're looking at a program which makes a difference for students who we might call pupil premium, students who, you know, school get pupil premium money for, it's actually a program which, being arts rich, is actually something which can make a real difference to their life opportunities. And unfortunately, it's not something that governments anywhere have really looked at as a major strategy for making changes in the lives of poorer children. He also found, and this is something that other researchers found, and we found in our previous research looking in secondary schools, is that young people in arts-rich schools are much more likely to be engaged in civic activities outside of school. And he wasn't able to say a lot about what an arts-rich school was, but he talks about them as having a kind of an atmosphere or a sort of a zeitgeist which is conducive to achievement, and where there was encouragement and a kind of climate in which young people were more engaged. And we also found that in our study of secondary schools, in the TAIL study, which we've written about in a book which we've called Cultural Citizenship, to emphasise that kind of dimension of activity beyond the school as well as within school achievement. We were very interested after the TAIL study to think about what was actually happening in primary schools, because we, you know, it's not all about the secondary, and we do think that what happens in primary schools has some influence on what's going to happen in secondary, and certainly makes a difference to the kind of development of learning and attitudes that, you know, kids have when they go into secondary schools. And it's a phase of education in its own right, and no one really had looked at arts richness in primary schools. So we did. And to start with, we wanted to look at, you know, what the characteristics of arts-rich primary schools were. And we talk about this as a design. We say there's a kind of a design which is common to the arts-rich primary schools. We did this study during COVID, which made it pretty tricky. And we initially found, you know, 180 odd schools who with various means were arts rich, and we mailed them all and asked them to complete a survey, and 76 of them did. And this is the pattern. I think the first pattern that we saw was that arts-rich primary schools teach a wide range of arts subjects. They all teach art and music, and by and large, they teach art and music to all children every week, every year. Sometimes a few of them is a little less than that, but there's a very strong commitment to a core curriculum which consists of art and music plus other things. So this is the kind of richness of the experience that the children are getting. We also saw some other kind of characteristics, if you like, across those 76 schools. There seemed to be very strong, as you'd expect, a very strong commitment to the arts from the school governors and school leaders. People saw that the arts were part of the school DNA. We were often told that it was about the school DNA. People, as we went further in the research, we confirmed that there was an understanding about why you do arts education and what kind of benefits that people thought that the children were getting. Very importantly, the survey showed that the schools had specialist staff, not only on staff, but also access specialist staff through cultural organisations and sometimes through, part-time employment. They had dedicated budgets and there were often dedicated spaces, and the budget and spaces were not necessarily easily won. Schools often had to, we found in our further research, the schools had to work really hard often to maintain the budget for this area and really did have to be committed to it. And the Arts Rich School, the other kind of characteristic is they have ongoing partnerships with more than one arts organisation and artist. And these are not just about projects, these are genuine kind of partnerships. And we do say a lot more about that in the report. So I think one of the things that we've done in the research is we've highlighted the importance of specialist art teachers in primary schools. And we say a number of things about the specialist art teachers and their importance, the way in which they work in a very trusting relationship with the senior leaders in the school. They possess very deep knowledge about their subjects, and they not only teach an art subject themselves, and they often don't do all the arts teaching in the school, they do some of it, but they also generally lead the development across the arts in the school. And that development has got, what we would understand as a clear kind of curriculum intention, and there's a clear kind of framework that shows children's progression through learning in the arts, and they monitor that, and they there's a process within the school for ensuring the quality of the arts education. But they also support classroom teachers in their generalist arts teaching. So in other words, the specialist art teachers are not responsible for all of the arts teaching. That's shared, but they often team teach, they provide resources, they engage in, formal and informal professional learning with their colleagues in the school. They often work outside the school, they build partnerships with arts organisations. They're often the first point of call for arts organisations. They organise events, which are really important in establishing relationships with the community. And they are part of and often establish networks in their local area and also beyond in the national area. So they're actually doing what, in research terms, we often call kind of system leadership, actually beyond the individual school, beyond the curriculum leadership that they exercise within the school. And we did in the study, and when you get the report, you'll see that we did survey general classroom teachers in a subsection of our sample of 40, in 22 of them. And what we could see is that, contrary to the research which has been carried out in a number of parts of the world, including in the UK, which reports that primary teachers, generalist primary teachers, generally don't feel very confident about teaching the arts. This was not the case in the arts-rich primary schools. Generalist classroom teachers generally felt, reasonably confident about teaching the arts subjects by themselves in their classroom, because they knew they could get support and resources. And it's kind of obvious, but it's helpful to actually know that we can confirm that generalist classroom teachers do get considerable support and professional development from those specialist arts teachers, and also from some of the cultural organisations that work with the school. But while we've talked about this as a pattern, we also, could see that every one of these arts-rich schools was unique. These were not cookie-cutter schools. They were not, really highly corporate. They were very individual, and they had different ways of doing things. One of the ways which was that helped them be distinctive, I mean, they were, different buildings, different histories. They were in different parts of the world, but they often had used the arts to forge very strong connections with place, and finding things in the place that they could work with and around through the arts helped to make the curriculum inclusive. Learning about the local is part of the primary curriculum, and children did use often cross-curricular approaches with the arts to learn about history, geography, the cultures in their neighbourhood, and how these connected to issues and events and the wider world. Schools often, had really strong connections with their local communities and artists, and took part in, heritage events, for example, were often very major contributors to these kind of local events. And this helped children in their own kind of identity formation, but also formed collective identities around the neighbourhood, and it brought children and families together. And what we saw, from looking at what the children told us, is that, the children had some kind of pride in these activities and through that their communities, and that was the precursor to the kind of active citizenship that Catterall's talking about. It is formed in the primary school through these kind of place-based activities. As Liam said, he talked to a lot of children. They often met him at the school gate, as arts ambassadors, and I think he was met by the Minister for Arts in the school on more than one occasion. But the schools were really committed to the way in which the arts help children develop their self-belief, their efficacy, their sense of being able to do things in the world, that strong sense of agency. The children confirmed that. Teachers often spoke about the children as artists, as specialist teachers, and because of that, children were taught a number of things that are important in arts practice, particularly that kind of capacity to think about what's good and what's not, and how it is that you can become good. And there was a focus on looking at the kind of progress that they'd made. And the schools often combined the arts with other echo schools, for example, with other priorities, and very often there were a lot of the schools got rights respecting schools, and the arts were integral to that. That kind of priority, because they helped build, what we've called sociality, but those kind of social practices. The arts were very important, and many of the schools had participatory processes like arts councils, for example, which allowed some children to have a say in what was happening in their arts programs. One of the most important findings, we think, is this notion of leadership density, that this is not, for the school people here, this is not distributed leadership. It is distributed, but the most important thing about it, we think, is that there were a lot of people involved in arts-rich schools in providing leadership of different kinds, ranging from, the senior leadership team and the specialist teachers through children, teachers, teaching assistants, governors, and they were able to actually all kind of move in the same direction. They had a shared vision. They all had their own part to play, but they were all moving together towards the same kind of goals around arts richness. And we heard people talking about that, and we can demonstrate that through looking at putting interviews together, that this kind of pulling in the same direction, achieving the goals of arts richness and rights respecting and so on, was actually happening. And so at the end of this, after we looked at, just saying about leadership density, it doesn't mean all the schools had a similar structure. They had different kinds of structures, just in the same way they had different ways of relating to place, but there was a kind of formal structure within the school as well. But there was also this more kind of informal process, very conversational, that went on, but it was differently inflected for each of the schools. And when we add all those things up and look at arts richness, this is the question we're left with. Why would you want to be arts poor? And the most important, perhaps, demonstration of that is we were able to compare the arts-rich schools with similar schools using family database, which is still now, it was taken down during COVID and is now being compiled again by the Education Endowment Foundation, and where they construct, little families of 50 schools. And what we did find is that the majority of RAPS schools, the arts-rich primary schools, were doing just as well as other schools, in some cases better. And, they were also doing, most of them were doing better than schools in their local authorities. Now, we think, better than is amazing. I mean, as good as, on the same kind of bell curve as other schools, would be terrific, given that a lot of people seem to think that doing the arts in your school is going to make your results go down. In reality, I think what this research suggests, and it could certainly do with a wider look, but our research suggests quite strongly that arts-rich schools are doing what James Catterall suggests of secondary schools, that the primary schools are likely to be providing the kind of environment where children, most of the schools, where children are doing as well as, if not better than, children in other schools. And so our big question really is, if that's the case, why would a lot more schools not choose to be arts rich, given the additional benefits that come from being engaged in the arts. And at the end of the report, you'll see we do have two sets of recommendations. One I haven't shown here. One is about things that you might do to become an arts-rich school. We want to say that, these arts-rich schools are an astounding resource for the school system in thinking about how it is that you become arts-rich. And we outline, some of the kind of key steps that schools have taken, that they told us about. We didn't make this up. This is what they said they did. But we also have made some recommendations for scaling up arts-rich primary schools, which we think starts with an entitlement to expressive arts learning for every child, which focuses on teacher education. Other research we did showed that primary teachers generally get, not exclusively, but in most teacher education programs, there's a cursory nod to the arts. Schools do find it difficult to get specialist art teachers. It's clear that they make a huge difference, and we think there should be special targeted programs to allow more people to train to become specialist art teachers. We think that a kind of national network of arts-rich schools would really help if there was some commitment to scaling up arts richness. We think cultural organisations ought to be specifically supported for developing long-term partnerships with schools and not just these kind of short-term projects. And it would be good if, when primary schools were being built from now on, there was some attention paid to the kind of facilities that they have. I think I've talked a little too long. Apologies for that. But you can now download the report on artsprimary.com. It's a little compressed file. I'll just warn you, you need to uncompress it. It's a PDF. It's the equivalent of a zip file. So you do need to actually save it and uncompress it. Otherwise, it's very hard to read. And I'd just like to end by thanking, on behalf of Chris and Liam, all the schools and the staff who spent so much time showing us what it is that they do. And we hope that this report actually reflects what they said and they can see themselves in the report. Okay, thank you. I'm now going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Pat. There is masses and masses in that brilliant overview that I know people that are with us in this webinar will want to ask questions about. Please do, you can post questions in the chat and we will come to them. Before we come to them, I wanted to just bring in Jo and Kerry, please, because we were particularly interested in asking them for their perspectives on what arts richness looks like. So one of the research questions, Pat, I know that you were focusing on through the study was what is an arts rich school? And we know from your study findings that actually it can manifest in many different ways. So Kerry, I wonder if I could start with you. And in terms of Lansbury Lawrence Primary School, can you share with us what being arts rich looks like in that school, in your school?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've got a bit of a list. Yeah, so again, if I chat too much, then just mute me. But I'm going to start with the top of that list of what all the schools did was art and music. So in our school, we've got instrumental provision for 120 children each week. And we have a range of instruments as well. So we have string, wind, brass. And the reason why we do that is so that we can introduce an element of ensemble and orchestra. And we've done that for about 5 years now. And it's something we invest. I think that's probably the first answer what our school does. You know, that's something we invest in. So there's no charge for parents for any of that. They can take their instruments home, practice at home, in school as well. You know, if they don't want to take a trombone home, which some of our families don't, fair enough. Yeah, so we invest and we create these opportunities. That's music. For art, we've got a dedicated art studio and art specialist. So I'm the art specialist, as long as with an assistant head, I also teach art. We've got really strong partnerships with creative and cultural organisations and also local schools and networks. So it's finding partnerships everywhere, really. I think, you know, there's strength in numbers. So you sort of find your tribe in all sorts of places. We go on lots of trips and again, and yeah, loads of trips actually. Sort of each child has a trip each half term. So to a creative or cultural venue. We're in London, so we're really spoiled with places to go, but you know, you have to use what you have around you, and so we certainly do, but there's no charge to parents for that either. CPDs, we provide internal and external art CPD for teachers and initial teacher training as well, and we see the value in that. Pupil leadership, yep, we're one of the schools with an arts council as well, so we've had one for about sort of 7 years now, and it's just brilliant just to have the pupil voice, really have the pupils leading on the arts, and that's really competitive as well. There's a lot of applicants for that each year. And place, so we use what we have. You know, our history is embedded within our curriculum and our school culture. We're really lucky. Our school was built as part of the Festival of Britain, so 1951, so architecturally it's interesting. We can use that within our curriculum, but also there's a really strong history in Poplar. So you know, we're in an area of economic challenge, but actually our school has a lot to be proud of. And so we embed that across all of our curriculum. And I guess that kind of goes into the why we do it really, but you know, Tower Hamlets, that's the borough I'm based in. So that's got the highest rate of child poverty in the UK. You know, we know that most of our families don't have opportunities to these arts and cultural experiences outside school. So we know it's our responsibility to provide them. We want our children to work alongside and be inspired by artists, designers, dancers, performers. You know, we want to ignite their passion. You know, they can be whatever they want to be when they grow up. So we want a level playing field. You know, we want the cultural capital like any other school. We've got high levels of EAL and SEND children, and the arts we find provide those children with other ways to express themselves, to communicate, to access the curriculum, to retain knowledge, retain information. Culture and community, we know we've created something special in our school, and you know, we're continually striving to make it better. It doesn't happen overnight. I've been at my school for 10 years now, but you know, we're still trying to make it better. What else can we do? And we've got a really supportive community. Our parents really value creativity. So in our parent survey, that's one of our questions. You know, do you value creativity? And we had 100% response of yes, they do. So it's another sort of driver. You know, we know we're doing the right thing. We know our families appreciate it. We know our teachers and children appreciate it too. and my final, the impact, so how we can measure all of this work. But we have gathered some evidence that the arts can support learning and knowledge acquisition across the curriculum. And most recently, we've done that through the Paul Hamlin Foundation Teacher Development Fund. So we've been exploring ways that dance and movement can be used across the curriculum. And we found really sort of positive results of that. And that's with 5 local schools as well. So that was really valuable research over 2 years. We're just sort of coming to the end of that now. Yeah, our staff and children are enjoying teaching and learning through the arts. We know that through their surveys too. Art is the top favourite subject across the school. I don't bribe them or anything, so yeah, so I'm very proud of that. I can stay. Our children are going on to study GCSE art subjects at secondary schools. We see a lot of the siblings, but also we've got a lot of feeder secondary schools, so we can monitor that. Our children want to be artists, designers, architects when they grow up, and we're seeing a broader range of aspirations year on year. And skills such as communication, confidence, and collaboration are developing. So, you know, we just think the arts are empowering our community with a voice. And I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I was really struck by 100% of the parents responding in that survey to the importance of creativity, and your comment about you've been in the school 10 years and it takes time. So 10 years ago, that might not have been the case, but how wonderful that they really see the value of that work for their children as it's grown. Thank you so much. So Joanne, it would be really helpful to think about it, because we've heard a really wonderful example from Kerry of what being arts rich can look like in a single school. You're talking about schools across a trust. So Joanne, can you tell us what being arts rich looks like in a trust context?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks, Jackie. So the trust itself is in 3 regions across the country. So London, East Anglia and the West Midlands. And each area very much has its own identity. So the trust doesn't have a top-down model in terms of school improvement and the curriculum. There are frameworks and structures that help us collaborate. And I think that's quite an important point in terms of our approach to the arts in schools and why we think we're an arts-rich academy trust. Certainly for the MAT, I think the arts are at the core of our ambition for all of the children to have that really rich primary experience. I mean, we are a primary MAT, and it's important to us that the children are gaining that rich primary experience. I think the primary curriculum is really busy. It's easy for things to get lost, but we want our children to have that enriching, ambitious, relevant curriculum while they're at school. And for me, it's very much about serving the community that's in which the school is based, but then also having those national connections. So to give you an example of how the arts support us in doing that, and in fact, I would say not just support us, but challenge us and find new ways of thinking. So on one level, one of our schools, Croft Academy, a 1-form entry in Warsaw, has worked closely in partnership with Stan's Calf Theatre on the coming of the canals to Warsaw. And that was a performance, a devised piece of theatre with the children. We hadn't necessarily planned it to be a performance, but it's what it became as they learnt about their local history and context. And then on the other hand, as an Academy Trust, we've got a long-term relationship with the Royal Ballet and Opera. And so we took 2,000 children to Covent Garden so that there were children from every school in the country. There's 36 of them who sang the Magic Flute at Covent Garden. So you've got that on the ground, work on the curriculum, work on pedagogy, work in classroom, working alongside teachers to develop their pedagogy and understanding. But there's also the ambition of the MAT. The second thing I wanted to say is we want to help the schools be the best that they can be, because understandably, there's a reason why some schools are in a MAT, given the political framework we've been part of. Some opt in, not all of them do, but we want them all to work together, and collaboration for me is a key part of that. And again, I think that's a key part of how we focus on the arts in schools and work in partnership. We've got regional arts leads, so there's 3 of them, 1 in each region, and they work with me to help coordinate and make sure that work happens on the ground. You know, they kind of iron out some of those things and make sure things happen. And a network of arts ambassadors in every school. Most of them have got arts mark, often gold and platinum. We don't have a set model of pedagogy, but it's more that we agree collectively from what we can see in our data and from our visits to schools and from what we understand. And a programme that I'm finding so personally enriching at the moment is a partnership with the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. So working predominantly with our East Anglian schools, but connecting with everybody, we identified that the role of the adult in the early years was one of our areas for improvement. We were saying the early years practice is okay, it's pretty good. How do we make it amazing? And we felt it was about the role of the adult and enabling them to be more creative and self-motivated in their practice. And the very generous, inspiring team at the FITS have worked with us on a programme exploring creativity and visual art through a slow pedagogical approach to support adults in the classroom. And it takes me on to my final point, really, which is about how we work with our senior leaders and head teachers. So when we were launching that piece of work, all of the head teachers in the region came to the Fitzwilliam and had a day exploring visual art for themselves. And I know that they found that incredibly valuable and enjoyable. And it was an opportunity, it was permission from the Academy Trust. We're going to spend a day together, head teachers, and we're going to look at visual art. And then you'll have the opportunity to explore some practices for yourselves. And everyone came away saying, we need our whole schools to do this. We need everyone in our schools to have this opportunity. And I think it's that we want to respect that. We want to respect that senior leaders themselves are learners too. They need the opportunity to engage in arts-based practices so that they themselves can create that change in school. And one of the key points for me, which is the final point I wanted to make, is because that then links to ways of looking at complex problems that they in their own schools or that we as a MAP might be dealing with. So a recent example that I'm sure everyone will be familiar with is the level of need post-COVID, children's communication needs, for example, and their emotional needs. So another deep partnership we have is with a non-verbal communication theatre company called Open Theatre, who we've been working on in terms of looking at ways that children who don't speak in a normative sense actually communicate through physicality and through, different ways of communicating their needs. And again, it's through our head teachers that we're supporting that development. The Royal Opera House have done workshops with our heads themselves. They danced, they sang, they said it was the best thing they'd ever done. And it's that, isn't it? It's how you build it into our school improvement processes, but it's very much part of the structures as the MAT itself.
Thank you so much, Joanne. That was wonderful to hear about how it can operate at that macro, at that trust level. Just a reminder, because we've had some colleagues joining us partway through. So this is a recorded session, and the recording of the full session will be available, and Pat will also include a link, or the Cultural Learning Alliance will include a link to the presentation that Pat has taken us through, so everybody will have all of the information that's been shared. But just a reminder of who our speakers are this evening. We've got Professor Pat Thompson and Professor Christine Hall and Liam Malloy, who are the research team and co-authors of the Research for Arts in Primary School study that we've been exploring in rich detail so far. And we're also joined by Kerry Sellens, who's the assistant head at Lansbury Lawrence Primary School in Tower Hamlets in London, and Joanne Clifton, Director of Curriculum and Development at the Elliott Foundation. So a multi-academy trust working across 3 areas, as Joanne has just talked us through. So we're now going to go into some questions that we've had through. The first question we're going to go to is from Jeff Redman, and Jeff is known to many people, I'm sure, on the webinar, but also leading on the Drama and Theatre Education Alliance, amongst many other things. So Jeff asks how we can ensure that the unique contribution of each art form to children's learning within an expressive arts umbrella is sustained. The specificity of each of those art forms, Kerry, that you've spoken so beautifully about, of what we do in an art classroom, or what we do in a music classroom, or what we do in a drama classroom. Would anybody be happy to respond to Jeff's provocation there about how each of the specialist experiences of artistic practices are sustained?
I don't mind
Kerry,
speaking on that one.
yeah, please do. And just to say, maybe we could bring on Liam and Christine, so we have the panel now in view, because we'll be posing questions to any one of our panelists. Kerry, please take that question.
Yeah, hi Jeff. I think you're asking how they get kind of equal weighting as well, especially in a primary school. And you know, like Joe mentioned earlier, you know, the weight of the curriculum in a primary school, and especially when you go into some of the art subjects that actually aren't part of the curriculum. You know, I spoke about dance, and dance is such a small part of PE, you know, but there's so much more potential, you know, than that little corner of the PE curriculum. So that's what we've been exploring. But how we got to that stage was through ArtsMark. And there's a very good kind of self-evaluation stage at the start of it, where you just kind of evaluate what you've got, where your strengths are, and actually where, you know, there's room for a bit more improvement. And ours was dance, so we sort of really focused on that. But we took that evaluation just really seriously, and it's like just looking at all the different arts, and trying to kind of teach them discreetly as well. You know, sort of drama tends to be a little bit of English, but then, you know, how can you get children to perform outside of the classroom as well? So it's being quite thorough and sort of evaluating what you've got, but yeah, also where are the opportunities to kind of go a little bit deeper within the arts too.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Chris, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just building on what Kerry said, I think what we saw across the schools was the importance of the specialist teachers, but obviously each school hasn't got every specialist teacher. So you sort of begin, I think, where you are with who you've got, and the use of those specialist teachers to really delve into deep curriculum knowledge about that subject was a really important starting point. What Kerry's described, that sort of analysis, that very careful analysis to make sure what you're not covering, and have a program of kind of building up in that way. Often people picked up partnerships with cultural organizations to help them do that. And we saw those working really productively in schools. But it's that long-term commitment to building the arts richness over time, and starting from the resources that you've got and building on those that we saw that had worked so well as people talked about the history of their own schools.
Thank you so much. We'll move to another question now. I hope I'm going to put Debbie Kate Hartland has asked about can panelists, and this might be one for Liam actually, because you've spoken to all of the children, but about giving examples of how children's voices and ideas are being responded to and enacted within the arts-rich school environment. That might be within arts councils that we've already referenced, or it might be in other ways. Liam, would you like to start a response to that?
Yeah, I think the most explicit way that student voice was used in an arts context was in what we would refer to as a Room 13 style setup, which is a student-led art space. It's got a long history, started off in near Fort William in Scotland, but now Room 13 networks all around the world. And these are spaces that children have a lot of autonomy within. In some of them, they have budgetary control and other, you know, to buy resources or even to book artists to come in and work with the children. So, you know, that's a very explicit, obvious way that the student voice can be used to not only create art, but to then manage art space. So they're going beyond, well beyond just being artists. They're becoming kind of entrepreneurial and advocating for arts in a much wider way.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to add into that with any other examples? Room 13 is a really brilliant one. We've got lots of questions coming through, so if not, I'm gonna head into some other questions. So Carolyn has asked, is this work being shared with the Department for Education? Chris, perhaps maybe that's one to you of, was any of this ready in time for the curriculum review submissions that we were all making back in November? Pat? Has this gone to the Department for Education? Will it go?
We hadn't finished by November, but I do believe that the curriculum review has had the final report, and I think we will try and follow it up. We think there may be another phase where we're able to expand on what's in the report, but we have tried to put the report, once it was finalised, in the hands of people who would be able to do something with it. But if anybody can help with that, who's listening, who can put it into other people's hands, who can make use of it and use it as evidence, that would be great.
We're all waiting with bated breath, I'm sure, for the interim curriculum review report to be published, and we're expecting that might come out perhaps next month. And certainly in response to that, we know that, for example, the Education Select Committee can call for additional evidence before the actual main report is published later in the year. So that would be a great opportunity to be submitting this to members of the Education Select Committee, certainly. A question from Rick Hall, which is particularly to our teacher colleagues, Joanne and Kerry, about whether you could say a little about the importance or whether local cultural education partnerships have been involved in your experience of helping to build and sustain partnerships between schools and artists and arts organisations. Have you been working with local cultural education partnerships, otherwise known as LSEPs, Joanne or Kerry? Joanne, thank you.
I can jump in there. It was variable, to be honest. I think the richest work we did was with the bridge organisations, so Festival in East Anglia, Arts Connect in the West Midlands, and then A New Direction in London. So when I saw the question come up, I thought, oh, yes, we did struggle a bit, actually. We didn't have deep links with them. It was more with the bridges and links with the Arts Council that way.
Interesting, with changes in funding, we have some of the brilliant bridges that have been able to stay in place, but some of them not. So that's, yeah, really interesting. Gavin Davenport has a question which a number of you might have some responses to. So Gavin's asking, how do you envisage the arts specialist primary school teacher training happening? Is this the same model as other specialist training, or is it something deeper? Could, for example, idea from Gavin, could arts-rich schools offer work-based learning opportunities or placement opportunities to sort of build that capability and capacity in more teachers? Who would like a first crack at responding to that question? Kerry?
Only because it's quite timely, because at lunchtime today I did a presentation for University of East London on their primary PGCE programme, their art specialist pathway. It's late, but yeah, their art specialist pathway. So they've got students particularly doing a primary PGCE with an art specialism. So I spoke to those. So I can see, I've not seen that before. I mean, I studied at the Institute and I did specialise in art, but it didn't have that sort of big headline title. So I see this as kind of, perhaps in PGCE settings, this is becoming a thing. of which I am very pleased and happy and excited about. And it was nice to see such a big full room of teachers that are training with that art specialist. So they had specialism in art and music, and they were enthusiastic. And yeah, it was great to speak to them. So I'm seeing it positive, but really that's just from my experience at lunchtime. That's what I put my hand up.
Any other thoughts on how the specialism is developed? Is that through partnerships with initial teacher education? Is it through, do we need some form of innovation fund in order to look at what forms of professional learning are needed in order to really equip more of our teachers to have those specialist skills? Pat or Chris, do you have any thoughts about that?
I've got loads of thoughts about that.
Go on,
I mean,
please do.
In the first place, the specialist route needs to be taken really seriously. I mean, we're very used to training specialist teachers in secondary. There's no particular problem. It's about the will to do that and to advertise the courses and to promote those courses and to take this really seriously. So it's part of a general malaise in relation to the arts, I think, that we're seeing there. The amount of time that's given for generalist teachers in primary teacher education on the whole question of the arts and what arts might offer is absolutely ridiculously small. So that, that's a separate piece of work that Pat's led on, surveys across the different teacher training institutions to look at that amount of time. And it's given such low priority that, of course, you're going to end up with people not feeling confident when they come out of their initial training. In relation to the question of could arts-rich schools offer workplace-based places? Of course they do, and those are wonderful places to be. But of course, in a lot of places, people who in training or just coming out of training are in schools where the sense is that this is something that should be squeezed and that there isn't time to do it because you're too busy on other stuff. And so you don't get that sort of input that you will get from from the arts-rich schools, where you see it driving all sorts, or the whole curriculum and the sense of the children's identity and being core to that purpose. So there's a huge amount to do, but it's not really rocket science what you need to do. You just need to take it seriously and give it higher priority. And it's wonderful that Kerry had that experience at East London.
Thank you, Chris.
To come in now.
We do recommend actually that, if I'm the education minister, that I might allocate funds for, say, 3 years for a specialist program, which had people who had either, formal qualifications in art, or who in fact were practicing artists who might want to enter one of the teaching routes. And there are a load of different ways to be a teacher, based in a school or doing a PGCE. But we think actually encouraging artists and people who've got formal art qualifications would be a good thing to do. And we imagine, given the parlous state of employment for artists, that a number of people, we know from a number of programs that a lot of artists actually would like to be able to do some teaching, perhaps not necessarily full-time in schools, and that opportunity is not necessarily available to them. And the government could do something about that, as well as schools and universities. And the survey that Chris referred to, the average amount of time in an ordinary PGCE program in a university primary is 4 hours. And there are, of course, some universities that do more than that, but it's 4 hours, and that's pathetic.
Thank you, Pat. So another question, we're going to move on now. Simon James, I wonder if that is Simon from Durham. If it is, hello. Asking, how do we get head teachers to dedicate the time that's needed to this work and to developing their school as an arts-rich school, and basically how do we convince the unconvinced? I know this is the constant question, isn't it? But any reflections on, I mean, you know, the 77% statistic in the report of, you know, 77% of the RAP schools being as good as or better than, and more of them than not being better than other schools in their family of schools. That's very compelling evidence. I don't know, Joanne, do you want to start us off with what do we think is going to really shift the dial to get the unconvinced to really look at this very compelling research?
There's so many different ways of looking at this, isn't there? That there are metrics that we could look at, like attendance, for example, or behaviour, as well as academic outcomes. I think they're useful. So you can have information like that I think is helpful, certainly if you're working with someone that is not at all convinced and you want to go through those traditional methods. But there are other ways too. It may be, you know, that experience of looking at things a bit differently that helps them fix a problem they've been worried about. So I'm thinking about a head teacher who I have huge respect for, but, you know, was very tearful because she felt she couldn't meet the needs of the complex SEND cases that were in her school. And it was that, how about we look at this together differently? And initially she wasn't very interested, but let's give it a try. And through exploring nonverbal communication, we ended up training the whole school on that strategy and ways of looking at things, because it was like, just a minute, we want new ways of learning about this. Sometimes it's very small steps, like how about we try storytelling, or, you know, it really does depend. There are lots of different ways of looking at it, or it might be purely a joyful experience of singing together, like my group of head teachers did, you know, who I did literally lock the door because the Royal Opera House arrived, and like, we're the Royal Opera House and we're going to sing. And I could see some of my colleagues going, but the minute everyone got to their feet and was gently guided into it, and by the end people said that was the best thing we've ever done, please can we do it again? So, you know, there's a whole range of things we could think about.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, head teachers believe other head teachers, don't they? And teachers believe other teachers. So the more, you know, that we get more advocates in the system. Chris, sorry, did you want to come in? And
no, I was going to make the same point, that for us, the idea of a network of, we saw such fabulous schools in this network, and they exist, but they're sort of undiscovered. And obviously they are the most convincing things to other schools. So that's the most convincing form of evidence. So somehow creating a network that allows, it's easy now to have this kind of electronic access, even if you can't have physical access, to have an hour talking to somebody about how they do what they do in their school is absolutely invaluable. And if we can promote that across the forms of collaboration, it might be collaboration within a multi-academy trust, it might be within a local authority, or it might also be really important to just highlight the arts rich network and bring those people together, so that there's a resource there for people to get their evidence from.
thank you. We'll move into some other questions. So there's a couple of questions that have come in, which is about school relationships with cultural organisations. So Cameljet from Art at the Heart in the West Midlands says that, I'm summarising, but says that a lack of funding is one of the most cited reasons for lack of engagement between schools entering into partnerships with arts organisations. But Cameljet is asking, what would you advise? I think this is one particularly for Joanne and Kerry. What would you advise for developing partnerships with schools for the arts or cultural organisation that's rooted in their community? Now, connected to that, we had a question from Louise Campbell about how schools afford working with cultural partners. So advice from Joanne and Kerry, from the school's perspective, about the best way for grassroots or any scale of organisation to be starting that process of working in deep ways and meaningful ways with schools, and then also addressing the resourcing question of how it's budgeted for. Would either of you would like to start a response there? Thanks, Joanne.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that one. And it's always a shame, isn't it? I really understand that question, that piece of feedback. And yet there is funding there. There's funding within the core schools budget. There's the People Premium Grant. And the arts sector is incredibly generous and thoughtful and collaborative in the way that they want to work with schools. But it's often about language and understanding and supporting schools to see that they're not just buying you in for an afternoon of fun, or though that might be nice, you know, but it's about your fundamental questions, your fundamental issues in school, and how looking at things through an arts lens can often, you know, help you tackle those issues. And I think Chris's point about head teachers talking to head teachers and teachers talking to teachers is really valuable there, because if you can explain how you managed to find, say, that £7,000 simply by reworking some of your budget and looking at things in a different way, it often becomes very doable.
Thank you. Kerry.
Yeah, I can just build on what Jo said, really. I think, you know, all schools have development plans that, you know, they're looking to develop in certain areas, and the arts can help in all sorts of ways, depending on, and each school is different as well. But, you know, you need to, I think, create a relationship with the schools. So I think, you know, schools, and I'm not speaking for all arts-rich schools, but maybe I am for Jo and I, as we're here tonight. But you know, we want legacy. You know, so it's not about just coming in, doing a workshop, and then going away. We want sort of value from what you're coming in and bringing to us. We're learning from you as arts professionals, but we want something that's going to be sustainable in our school. So I think the best thing to do is to co-design. So you need to start with a conversation about what areas are your schools looking to develop at the moment, and how can we help, and how can we work together. I think artists have one set of skills and teachers have another set of skills, and if you can, you know, meet in the middle, that's where the magic happens. But yeah, you have to work together on that.
Yeah, starting from what does the school really need. Ali D has asked if there are any examples of the kinds of artworks that the children produced through the study that are examples of what's possible. I think that question of how do we case study and make visible the really brilliant examples of practice that we have, because that's so inspiring for other schools who are just trying to think, well, how do I start? Is there anything that you would say about any examples of the artworks of children? I don't think they are available online, but yeah, please come in.
They are available online. So in the same blog site that the report has just been dropped into, artsprimary.com, there are at least 40 or more blogs. As I went round each school, I blogged each separate school. I took lots of photographs. They're all embedded through the report itself, but they're all on those blog sites. And you can have a look at those. The one thing I will say, and my background is in the performing arts, music specifically, is much harder to capture in a written report or a photograph. So I just want to sort of big up the music, the singing, the rehearsals that I went to, the dance, the drama, the choral speaking, and all the audio visual stuff that I saw in Greenside, for example, film school. Yeah, I really want to thank you. It's a privilege to be invited to some of those rehearsals and those assemblies. I know that some of them were set up especially for me, and I just want to say thanks to everybody that did that.
As well, that would be brilliant to look at all of those fantastic examples in the report. Christine.
I think also some of the most impressive work is actually very local. It's that connection to place. And when you see a school where the children are really through the arts exploring, using the arts to explore the place that they're from, to get that sort of sense of identity and belonging, and connect. There's a lot of community connections then, and that work is it's arts, but it's also history and geography often, and science, and it's that sort of rootedness that is incredibly impressive, I think, but very specific. So it's not a performance as such, if it runs right through the school, and you can see the pride that the children develop in their place in that way. That's really obvious actually in Joe's schools, and hugely obvious in Lansbury Lawrence as well.
Thank you, Chris. Moving into another question, Catherine Mills has asked whether school leaders, so this is one for Kerry and Joanne again, whether school leaders have found that sharing arts events has positively impacted on engaging the harder to reach parents and carers. I don't know whether any of you have a view on that. Kerry, I'd come back to the statistic that you gave of 100% of parents really valuing the sorts of experiences, the creative arts experiences you're bringing. Have you noticed that it's the arts experiences themselves that have given you a different hook through which to engage parents that might otherwise not have engaged with the school? Kerry or Joanne?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. You have to, again, being a bit strategic about it. Just before half term, we had an exhibition for, we've got a Key Stage 1 SEND provision, and we had an art exhibition of their work. And so inviting those families in and just making it accessible for them. So, yeah, thinking about the children's needs and the family's needs and making it, quiet and small and accessible for them. So just, yeah, I think the arts have huge amounts of potential to engage all families, all of our community.
Thank you. Joe, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think the arts can make things more accessible for parents too. I remember in the early days when I was first at Billesley and the schools in special measures, the parents told me that doing arts-based workshops was much more accessible for them and more enjoyable because they didn't feel threatened by it. So they'd come and join us for some printmaking or, some other kind of work, which they would attend in their droves, whereas a phonics workshop, they wouldn't come. And another occasion I remember was when we started working with a music specialist, and the whole of Year 4 stood up and did a musical performance, and all of the parents in Year 4 turned up for that. And I think it gave a great sense of pride to see their children on stage performing, which they'd not had that experience before because the school was in trouble. So I absolutely think it's a key factor actually in getting the parents on board.
Thank you. Moving into another question, Emma Bush has asked, is there any evidence that the freedom to be creative and the kind of autonomy that the arts can give teachers, as well as giving young people, has a positive impact on staff well-being and staff retention? That might be another research project, but Liam, Chris and Pat, did you see a correlation between staff well-being and staff retention? Is that something that came through? Liam, are you?
We didn't specifically look at that.
Oh, Pat, no.
It wasn't.
No, we didn't specifically. We didn't specifically look at that. And any piece of research only does so much. I think it could be something, a follow-up piece to look not only at well-being, but also perhaps recruitment and retention of staff. I think there's an interesting question about whether, these schools have more sustainable kind of staffs. I think we certainly saw some evidence of teachers who were long-term in the school, but we also know that there's been turnover in some of the schools that we studied as well. I don't think, I mean, Liam can say some more about this, but I don't think when he went into schools there was a kind of general impression that they were miserable places, but I'd suggest it's a kind of something that could be followed up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we used the word vibe, didn't we? The vibe of the school, the energy, the positivity, I suppose, but the creativity, the all these things bundled in this term, arts richness. I'll stop talking.
If I could just add, I think the issue about leadership density is quite important here as well. The use of people's specialism and enthusiasm for their subject, and the use of that within the school, and the respecting of that. So it's not just sort of hived off, but it's something that is shared. Because we found that the generalist teachers were more confident than you might normally expect, maybe, if you accept that generally primary teachers are not as confident about teaching the arts as they were in the schools that we studied. That was coming from that enthusiasm, people being able to explore their own subject background and enthusiasm there. I think that is a matter for retention. I think people then feel their identity, their own particular interests can be explored within the school. So although that wasn't something we specifically looked at, what we met were an extraordinary number of highly committed teachers who really loved the work that they were doing and could see the impact of it. And that has to be a retention and a well-being strategy for anybody doing such a complex and difficult job.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Time has literally flown. I do want to say, we know we haven't got through all of the questions, but we're absolutely logging all of them. There's lots that have come through that have lots of complexities in them, but we're definitely going to consider all of those points made and maybe find a way of reflecting some responses back. Just one final question, which might be to each of you. So just so that we've rounded off hearing from each of our really brilliant panelists, is in thinking about the aspiration that we have for all schools to be arts rich. What is the thing that stands out to you most, the one thing that stands out to you most from the RAPS study that would be helpful as a starting point for a school that's just beginning on that journey? So what's the one key foundational thing that a school needs to have in place that has arisen from the report, that is a place that a school could make the best start from? So let's hear from each person what their golden nugget is to pull out. Pat, can I come to you first?
Yes. I think maybe I'd start by thinking that you probably, if you're a school leader, you probably have to convince some other people that this is a good idea to start investigating. And I think I would use the general kind of big result about, your results don't necessarily go down. I might also find the BBC clip about Feversham, which features another of the RAPS schools, the Feversham, and with Naveed Idris, the head teacher, saying, the arts will actually help your school improve, out of the mouths of another head teacher. He's very convincing, I think. So I think I'd grab that as a school leader.
Thank you very much. Very short amount of time left. So Jo, could you go next? What's the one nugget?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's all about teacher education. It's come up already. It's the thing that worries me the most. It's the experience of teachers to develop their professional knowledge and understanding as trainees and also throughout their career.
Thank you, Joanne. Kerry?
I think place, yeah. If you're an art specialist in a school thinking, where do I start? Then look where you are and start there, work outwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, place, as Kerry said, but also staffing. What's the strength of your staff? Do they have interests, specialisms, experiences? That's certainly the story behind some of the Arts Rich journeys that I heard, that staff literally just sat around a table and had extended conversations, but primarily drew on their own strengths and experiences.
Thank you, Chris.
Mine is just, why would you want your school to be anything other than arts rich? What are you doing if you're setting out to be arts poor? So it's just an obvious thing. You should be teaching a broad and balanced curriculum, and this is what it's about.
Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, for all of your brilliant questions, observations, and enthusiasm. So much rich enthusiasm coming through for the quality of the report and the research. So thank you so much, Pat and Chris and Liam, for all of the work you put into creating that report that is gold for us, and to Joanne and Kerry for the amazing work happening in your school and trust that contributed to that report being published. A communication will come out with the recording and with the report itself. This is the first of a number of webinars coming forward in the future. So we hope to see you again. Thank you all very, very much indeed.